Jimmy Fallon has conducted thousands of interviews over 10 years, but none of them were interrupted like this. His guest suddenly stood up, saw a face in the audience, and that face changed everything. The Tonight Show starring Jimmy Fallon. Studio 6B at 30 Rockefeller Plaza. Tuesday night, October 2023. The familiar rhythm of late-night television, monologue, comedy sketches, celebrity interviews, musical guests. 300 people in the studio audience. Millions watching at home. Everything running exactly as planned. Julia Roberts was the night's main guest, promoting her latest film. Sitting in the orange guest chair across from Jimmy, laughing at his jokes, sharing anecdotes about her career, her kids, her life. The conversation was flowing naturally, the kind of effortless chemistry that comes from two people who've known each other for years. Jimmy was in his element. Relaxed. Charming. Making Julia laugh with his impressions and self-deprecating humor. The Roots provided the perfect musical punctuation to every joke. The audience was engaged, laughing at all the right moments. This was television perfection. Polished. Professional. Exactly what America expected when they tuned in at 11:35 p.m. Until Julia's eyes drifted past Jimmy's shoulder toward the studio audience. Her smile froze. Her hand, which had been gesturing animatedly during a story about her daughter, stopped mid-air and slowly lowered to grip the armrest of her chair. The color drained from her face. Jimmy noticed immediately. Any good host would. He paused mid-sentence, tilted his head slightly. "Julia? You okay?" Julia didn't respond. She was staring at someone, in the audience. Her breathing had changed. Shallow. Rapid. Her knuckles white against the orange fabric of the chair. The studio fell into confused silence. The Roots stopped their soft background music. The cameras, trained to follow the action, zoomed in on Julia's face, then panned to try to find what she was looking at. "Julia?" Jimmy said again, his tone shifting from playful to genuinely concerned. "What's wrong?" And then Julia Roberts stood up. Not the polite standing of someone excusing themselves. Not the casual rising to stretch. This was abrupt. Urgent. Her chair scraped backward against the stage floor with an audible screech that echoed through the studio. Jimmy's blue interview cards slipped from his fingers and scattered across his desk. Jimmy stopped mid-joke. The entire studio froze. Julia stepped off the elevated platform where the guest chair sat, her heels clicking rapidly against the hardwood stage floor. She was moving toward the audience section, her eyes never leaving whoever she'd spotted in the crowd. The cameras scrambled to follow her. Operators frantically adjusted their angles. The control room erupted into chaos. Directors shouting into headsets, producers trying to decide whether to cut to commercial, nobody knowing what to do because nothing like this had ever happened before. Jimmy stood behind his desk, one hand gripping its edge, completely paralyzed. In 10 years of hosting The Tonight Show, through countless surprise guests, unexpected pranks, and spontaneous musical performances, he had never, not once, had a guest simply leave the interview and walk into the audience. The studio audience parted instinctively, people leaning back in their seats to create a path. Some whispered to each other. Others pulled out their phones. Most simply stared in stunned silence, unable to process what they were witnessing. Julia reached the third row and stopped in front of an elderly woman. The woman sat perfectly still, both hands clasped to her chest, her weathered face frozen in an expression of complete shock. Her white hair was pulled back in a neat bun. Tears streamed down her lined cheeks. Behind her glasses, her eyes were wide and disbelieving. The studio's overhead lights illuminated the scene with brutal clarity. Every camera in the building was now pointed at this moment. 300 people and millions of viewers watching something that wasn't scripted, wasn't planned, wasn't supposed to happen. Julia dropped to her knees in the narrow space between the rows of seats. The elderly woman's hands flew to cover her mouth. A sound escaped her throat, half gasp, half sob. Julia reached forward and took those trembling hands in her own. "Helen?" Julia's voice cracked, barely audible but caught perfectly by the boom microphones overhead. "Is it really you?" The woman nodded, unable to speak, tears flowing freely now. Jimmy Fallon, still standing frozen at his desk, felt his own eyes filling with tears despite having no idea what he was witnessing. To understand what happened next, you need to understand what happened 38 years earlier. Julia Roberts wasn't always Julia Roberts, Hollywood royalty and America's sweetheart. In 1985, she was just Julia, a 17-year-old girl in Smyrna, Georgia, with a dream of becoming an actress and absolutely no idea how to make it happen. Her family was struggling. Her parents had divorced when she was young. Money was always tight. Her mother worked multiple jobs to keep food on the table. The idea of drama school or acting classes or moving to New York seemed impossible, a fantasy for rich kids, not for a girl from Georgia who couldn't even afford a car. But Julia had a drama teacher at her high school who believed in her. Mrs. Helen Pritchard. A woman in her late 40s who taught English and directed the school plays, who saw something special in the shy, gangly teenager who auditioned for the fall production. "You have something, Julia," Helen had said after that first audition. "Something rare. You make people believe you. That's the hardest thing to teach, and you already have it." Helen became more than a teacher. She became a mentor. A champion. The person who stayed after school to run lines with Julia. Who spent her own money to buy Julia her first professional headshots. Who wrote recommendation letters to drama programs and helped Julia fill out scholarship applications. "You're going to make it," Helen would tell her, with absolute conviction. "You're going to be a star. And when you are, I want you to promise me something." "What?" Julia had asked. "Don't forget where you came from. Don't forget the people who believed in you before anyone else did. And don't let this business make you someone I wouldn't recognize." Julia promised. In the spring of Julia's senior year, Helen helped her get accepted to a drama program in New York with a partial scholarship. It still wasn't enough. Julia would need money for living expenses, for food, for everything else. It seemed impossible. Helen showed up at Julia's house one Saturday morning with an envelope. Inside was $3,000 in cash, Helen's entire savings account, emptied. "I can't take this," Julia had said, crying, trying to give it back. "It's not a gift," Helen said firmly. "It's an investment. In you. In your talent. And someday, when you're successful, you can pay it forward to some other kid who needs someone to believe in them." Julia took the money. She moved to New York. She struggled. She auditioned. She got rejected over and over. But she kept going, hearing Helen's voice in her head, "You have something rare." Her breakthrough came in 1988 with Mystic Pizza. Then Steel Magnolias. Then Pretty Woman in 1990, and Julia Roberts became a household name virtually overnight. Magazine covers. Award shows. Movie offers flooding in. Her life transformed beyond anything she'd imagined in that Georgia high school drama room. She tried to stay in touch with Helen. She called the school. But Helen had retired and moved. The school didn't have forwarding information. Julia hired people to try to find her, but Helen Pritchard seemed to have vanished. No social media presence. No public records. Nothing. For 38 years, Julia carried the guilt of never repaying that $3,000. Never thanking Helen properly. Never showing her that the investment had paid off. She tried to honor Helen's lesson by supporting young actors, by being generous with her time and advice. But she'd never found Helen herself. Until tonight. October 2023. Sitting in the orange chair on The Tonight Show, mid-story about something completely unrelated, when her eyes happened to drift toward the studio audience, and she saw a face she hadn't seen in 38 years but would recognize anywhere. Subscribe and leave a comment, because the most powerful part of this story is still ahead. Julia was still kneeling in front of Helen, still holding her hands. The studio remained in absolute silence, 300 people bearing witness to something they didn't fully understand but instinctively knew was sacred. Jimmy had made a decision. He stepped out from behind his desk and walked toward the audience section where Julia and Helen were. The cameras followed him. The roots stopped entirely. Even the crew members had paused their work, watching. Jimmy crouched down beside Julia. "Hey," he said softly, placing a gentle hand on her shoulder. "What's happening? Who is this?" Julia looked at him, and the professional mask she'd worn for decades completely shattered. Tears streamed down her face, her voice breaking as she spoke. "This is Mrs. Pritchard," she said. "My high school drama teacher. She's the reason I'm here. The reason any of this happened. And I haven't seen her in 38 years. Helen was crying too, her hands still gripped in Julia's. "I've watched every one of your movies," she whispered, her voice hoarse with emotion. "Every interview. Every award show. I've been so proud of you. So proud. I tried to find you," Julia said desperately. "I tried so hard. I wanted to pay you back. I wanted to thank you. You gave me everything." "You don't owe me anything," Helen said, pulling one hand free to cup Julia's tear-stained cheek. "Watching you succeed has been payment enough. Seeing you become exactly who I knew you would be." Jimmy straightened up and addressed the studio audience, his own voice thick with emotion. "Folks, I think we need to take a moment here." He looked at the control room cameras. "If you're watching at home, something incredibly real is happening right now." He turned to his stage manager. "Can we bring another chair out here? Mrs. Pritchard needs to be part of this conversation." The audience erupted in applause. Not the manufactured TV applause, but real, thunderous, emotional applause. People were standing, crying. The Roots began playing a soft, gentle melody, Questlove's instinct for the perfect musical moment proving itself once again. Behind the scenes, Fallon made a decision that defied every producer's expectation. The Tonight Show didn't return to its scheduled programming. Jimmy helped both Julia and Helen to their feet. A crew member brought out a third chair, placing it between Jimmy's desk area and the orange guest chair. Helen sat down, still clutching a tissue, still crying, while Julia sat beside her holding her hand. Jimmy sat in his usual position but leaned forward, all pretense of host-guest dynamic gone. This wasn't an interview anymore. This was just three people having a conversation that happened to be witnessed by millions. "Mrs. Pritchard," Jimmy said gently, "can you tell us about Julia? When you first met her?" Helen smiled through her tears. "She was 17. So shy. She auditioned for our fall play and I remember thinking, this girl has no idea how talented she is. She had this quality. When she spoke, you believed every word. That's so rare. She gave me $3,000. Julia interjected, her voice still shaking. Her entire savings. So I could move to New York and study acting. I was 18 years old and she believed in me when nobody else did." Jimmy's eyes widened. He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out his wallet. He removed a credit card and handed it to a producer offstage. "Get Mrs. Pritchard's information. And make sure she gets home safely tonight, in a car service on us." Then Jimmy did something that would define his legacy as more than just a host. He removed his watch, the one his father had given him when he got the Tonight Show job, and placed it in Helen's hand. "This was given to me by someone who believed in me," Jimmy said quietly. "And now I'm giving it to you. Because people like you, teachers who invest in dreams, you're the real stars." The studio erupted. Standing ovation. Julia and Helen embraced. Jimmy wiped tears from his eyes. Share and subscribe. Make sure this story is never forgotten. After the show, Julia gave Helen a check for $100,000. 38 years of interest, she said. Helen donated every penny to a scholarship fund for aspiring actors. The fund is named after both of them, the Pritchard Roberts Arts Scholarship. Jimmy's watch sits on Helen's mantle. She wears it to every graduation ceremony where the scholarship is awarded. And Julia never does an interview without mentioning the teacher who changed her life.